If you had the chance to change fate, what would you do? Hey friends and lovers, wanna watch a movie? As we approach Academy Awards season and the campaigns around what movies deserve to win the award of Best Picture, I decided today that we are going to look at a movie that I pray wins Best Picture. This film made me feel so much more than I expected to feel, and the design and story that is made is it's a work of art. This is just an incredible movie, so sit back and relax as we talk about Past Lives. This film begins with an unseen couple observing three strangers from a distance. These strangers are Nora, Hae-sung, and Arthur. This couple speculates who these strangers are and what their relationships might be to one another. From what they can observe, Nora and Hae-sung are talking very enthusiastically to each other, where Arthur sits quietly next to Nora. We then flash back to 24 years earlier, where we meet a little girl named Na-young, and she is walking home with her best friend Hae-sung. Na-young is upset because she came in second place to her best friend Hae-sung at school, and she is notably the smarter one of the two. Na-young then goes to her parents and little sister and sees that they are all choosing English names as they prepare to immigrate to Canada, and she decides that her name will be Nora. Na-young and Hae-sung's mothers take them out to the park where they can have one last day together before leaving. When the two walk home together, the only thing that Hae-sung is able to say to Na-young is bye before she leaves. 12 years pass and we see that Hae-sung has completed his military tour and has returned home to Seoul and is at a bar where he frequently gets drinks with friends. Meanwhile, Nora is in college in New York and she's on the phone talking to her mother when Hae-sung gets brought up and Nora admits that she had a crush on him when they were kids. Nora's mom mentions that Hae-sung commented on a Facebook post for her father's restaurant and asked how to reach out to Nora. So Nora decides to reach out to Hae-sung with a friend request. Hae-sung responds and the two begin chatting over Skype and catching up and rekindling their friendship from before. Nora is working on becoming a writer, whereas Hae-sung is about to go to China in order to become part of a language exchange program. Hae-sung asks Nora why she never went back to Seoul, to which she invites him to come to New York, but neither one of them are in a situation where they can travel. And after some time, Nora tells Hae-sung that she doesn't really want to be in contact with him anymore because she wants to focus on her work and on her writing. Later, Nora goes on a writer's retreat where she meets Arthur. When they are alone together one night, Nora tells Arthur this concept of inyon. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it comes from a Korean saying where some people know each other from different past lives. If one person briefly passes another in their lifetime, that interaction meant something in their past life. And the way that it's explained is one person can briefly pass another in their life, but in another life that means that they could have been soulmates. And this saying gets furthered by saying that lovers continue through the different lives and that they are always going to have each other, which I think is a very sweet thing to say, especially as you are wooing this man. We see that Nora and Arthur become romantically involved. Meanwhile, in China, Hae-sung is becoming romantically involved with another woman. Another 12 years pass and we see that Nora and Arthur are now married and both work as writers. Nora is seen working at an audition for a play that she wrote, whereas Arthur is at a signing for his best-selling book, whose title you can look up on your own time, and that Nora goes with him to these signings as support. We also learn that Arthur is learning Korean for Nora, which I feel like should be the bare minimum, but because it's not the bare minimum, it's a very sweet gesture. Hae-sung then arrives in New York after breaking up with his girlfriend with the intention of finding Nora. She spots him on the street and the two spend the day catching up and doing some touristy things in New York. When Nora comes home, she mentions to Arthur that Hae-sung has decided to come and be there to see her. Arthur expresses some concerns because Nora and Hae-sung are childhood friends and they later realize that they might have been meant to be together, and so Arthur has this insecurity and nervousness about him, but Nora reassures him that she loves Arthur. Nora invites Hae-sung to dinner with her and Arthur. They go out and they end up at the bar that we saw at the beginning of this movie. And over the course of dinner, Nora and Hae-sung are chatting in Korean and then Nora translates for Arthur, But as dinner progresses, she gets more and more involved in the conversation and stops translating for Arthur, thus leaving him out of it. Hae-sung then brings up In-yeon to Nora and wonders what they were to each other in a past life. They both acknowledge that they are very different from who they were when they were kids, and even when they first rekindled their friendship when they met online. And during this dinner, Nora excuses herself to go to the bathroom, and we get this scene of Hae-sung talking to Arthur and saying that he did not mean to speak in Korean and leave Arthur out of this conversation, which is a nice gesture. And Arthur says that he doesn't mind because he can understand how important it is for Nora to reconnect with this individual. When the three return home, Nora goes outside with Hae-sung to wait for his Uber with him. They stand there in silence for a little bit as they wait for the car to arrive, and Hae-sung turns to Nora and says they may be in one of their past lives at the moment and wonders where they will find each other again. Hae-sung asks Nora what will their relationship look like in their next life, and she says she does not know. Hae-sung then says, "I'll see you then," and Nora goes back into her house crying and hugs Arthur. And thus ends Past Lives. And I know, this was a very short summary of this movie. My summary alone does not do this movie nearly enough justice. This is such an incredible movie, and I want to talk about some of the numbers before talking to you about why it is so important. This movie had a budget of $12 million and it made $26.6 million in box offices. Now, this isn't the largest box office performance, and some of those numbers are skewed because it did go to streaming services relatively quick. However, the reception and reviews of this movie, I feel like, make it stand out more than just a box office performance. On IMDb, this movie has a 7.9 out of 10 with 88,000 reviews and a Metascore of 94. On Rotten Tomatoes, this movie has an 84% audience score and a 96% on the tomato meter. And these reviews are great, but it's also won 73 awards and has been nominated for over 200, including 2 Academy Awards that we will find out in March. Overall, this, I think, is an incredibly successful film, even though it did not have that huge box office splash. I don't believe that movies need to have a huge box office performance in order to have a huge emotional impact on an individual. For me, I think that it's incredible that this kind of movie exists in this world. Telling the story of letting go of the what-ifs to focus on what is happening right now is something so human, and I love watching those kind of powerful stories about a human experience. There are so many moments in this movie that feel very grounded in that the characters feel like real people. No one's really a villain per se because they're all human. It just felt so real, and the environment and set design furthers that feeling by not being overly produced. This film is relatively simple in design, but that carries the message of this movie that it's not supposed to be this out there topic, but rather something that we've all gone through. And while we're talking about message, something I think important to acknowledge is that this isn't a love triangle movie, but rather we are watching Nora's personal struggles in this movie. To me, it feels as though this film is much more focused on Nora trying to come to terms with what her life is rather than getting caught up in the what my life could have been questions that we all have. As we age, there reaches a point of recognition for all of us, I think, where we realize that the life we have now is not necessarily the life we'd hope we'd have. And that realization can be filled with grief and frustration and depression and yearning as we think about what could have been in our lives. And in this film, we are watching Nora let go of the what could have been. Hae-sung embodies her past life and her childhood in Korea, and she explains in this movie that she wanted to stop talking to him to focus on the future and her current life. She recognized that she cannot fully invest in her life when she is focused so much on the past, and in this movie, the past is characterized as Hae-sung. On the other hand, we have Nora's relationship with Arthur and how much he represents her current life with New York and the writing and everything that she has worked for. The question that's being answered in this movie is not a will they, won't they, who will she end up with question, but rather a who is she going to be at the end of the day. It's answering what version of herself does she want to be. And her crying at the end of the movie is not necessarily because she can't be with Haesung, rather it seems to me like she is mourning the loss of that childhood and that past life that could have been, because she knows what she wants. Sure, she can be okay with the current life that she has, but that doesn't mean that she can't mourn the loss of her childhood and those curiosities and questions. There is something kind of comforting in those thoughts after all, and so her letting go of that is understandably hard. And of course, there are so many other incredible things that I want to bring up about this movie. For example, we begin this movie with a couple observing Arthur, Nora, and Haesung. We hear this unseen couple observe and try and guess what's happening in this dynamic that's being created, and we are establishing that the audience is that couple that is onlooking these three. We spend the movie wondering what their relationships are, what's going to happen, and these characters that are all a mystery in the beginning. And this next thing is going to sound so small, but I love how Nora and Haesung, when she's walking him to his Uber, they move from the right side of screen to the left side of screen. Now, I thought I was reading too much into this, and then I found out that Celine Song, who is the playwright for this movie, came out and said that that was intentional. She explained in an interview, "When you draw a timeline, it always works from left to right. By walking right to left, you are walking into the past. You can walk them there. The wind sort of blows her to the past, and then he gets in the car and the Uber has to drive into the past. She stands there for a moment, and then she's going to go back home, and every step is going to be a walk towards the future from the past." And I think that that's such an incredible detail to show how Nora is actively deciding that she wants to keep chasing her future with being a writer and being with Arthur rather than going back into her past. Overall, I think that this movie did an incredible job at showing that romanticized version of the if-thens that we create inside of our heads as we think about what could have happened in our lives. We often think of the memories of our past lives, whether it is other lives we have lived or the timeline that we are currently living, and acknowledging the loss of childhood things that are left behind and roads that were never taken and relationships that were never explored. And I think that that is such a beautiful thing to look at. Like I said multiple times, this movie feels incredibly human. There's something so fascinating when you take a movie and strip it down to show the human parts of our lives and of our world. This is something that is very real that we've all gone through, and to watch it on screen, I feel like is a catharsis. Sure, I am not going to call up one of my exes and see what would have happened if we had stayed together, or call up one of my childhood friends to see what would have happened had we'd stayed friends. But it's interesting to examine that and to see that release at the end of the movie, that it's for the best that those people have been passerbys. By living in the past, you are stopping yourself from exploring the future, and I think that that is such an important thing that we need to look at. I'm going to stop myself and say that this is such an incredible movie, and if you haven't watched it yet, I highly recommend it. And if you made it to the end of the video, dude, thank you so much for watching. Me telling you about this movie is not enough. You need to watch it. I think that it is such a remarkable story that's being told, and hey, if nothing else, you're educating yourself for the Oscars. This movie has a perfect, intimate feel to it that makes you really get attached to these characters, and it is just gorgeous. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's on streaming services. It's incredible. And if you have seen it, let me know what you thought of this movie down below. I'll send a little smooch your way, and I'll see you next time.